The manila envelope slapped against polished hardwood like a death sentence. Maria Coleman stared at it, her breath catching, her pulse hammering so loud she thought they could hear it through the walls. 5 years. 5 years of bowing deeper. 5 years of Korean language lessons and temple visits and swallowing every insult with a smile. 5 years of fertility treatments her mother-in-law called Western desperation. 5 years of watching her husband's eyes go cold every time she entered a room. 5 years of being called defective in a language she'd learned just to understand how much they hated her. Before we begin, I'd like to ask you for a small favor. Please subscribe to the channel. It helps us more than you can imagine and keeps these videos coming. Now let's dive in. The rain fell like accusations, cold and unrelenting, soaking through Maria's thin cardigan until she could no longer tell where the water ended and her tears began. She sat hunched on a bench in Itaewon, her suitcase at her feet, watching Seoul's neon lights blur into watercolor streaks through the downpour. Every passerby hurried past without a glance, their umbrellas tilted against her existence. She had nowhere to go. No money. No visa. In 48 hours, immigration would process her deportation papers, and she'd return to Manila in handcuffs. A cautionary tale whispered in her neighborhood for generations. The black Mercedes appeared without sound, gliding to the curb like a predator. Maria didn't look up until the engine cut and a car door opened with the soft click of German engineering. Expensive leather shoes stopped inches from her soaked sneakers. Maria Santos. Her name shouldn't have sounded like that, like a knife sliding from its sheath. She raised her head slowly, rain streaming down her face, and met eyes so dark they absorbed light rather than reflected it. He was tall, impossibly so, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than her annual salary. But it was the tattoos that made her breath catch, intricate patterns crawling up his neck, disappearing beneath his collar, speaking of a world where rules bent to power. His face was beautiful in the way a blade was beautiful. Cold, sharp, dangerous. "Who are you?" Her voice cracked. "Jinho Park." He said it like she should know, like everyone should know. She did know. Everyone in Seoul's underground knew that name. The man who controlled everything illegal that mattered and enough legal enterprises to make it untouchable. The wolf who wore Armani. "How do you know my name?" "I know everything about you, Maria. Your visa expires in 2 days. Your employer reported you for theft you didn't commit. Your fiancé drained your account and disappeared with his mistress." He recited her devastation like a grocery list. "You have 701 in your pocket and nowhere to sleep tonight." Humiliation burned hotter than the shame. "Why do you care?" "I don't." The honesty was refreshing in its cruelty. "But I have a problem you can solve, and you have several problems I can eliminate." He produced an envelope from inside his jacket, somehow perfectly dry despite the rain. Inside, she glimpsed documents, photographs, her passport. "Marriage," he said simply. "A contract. You become Mrs. Park for 6 months. You attend events, smile appropriately, convince certain people I've reformed. In exchange, I clear your charges, secure your visa, and destroy everyone who destroyed you. Why would you? My reasons aren't your concern." His voice dropped lower, intimate as violence. "Your concern is this. Accept, and you become untouchable. Refuse, and you're on a plane to Manila in 48 hours, branded a criminal." Maria stared at the envelope, then at the man holding it. Everything about him screamed danger, from the tattoos to the cold calculation in his eyes to the way even the rain seemed afraid to touch him. She had nothing left to lose, nothing except her pride, and pride couldn't keep her warm or safe or fed. What do I have to do? Jinho Park smiled for the first time, and it was terrifying. Say yes, Maria. Just say yes. She took the envelope with shaking hands. Yes. Maria's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the marble table, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what this man was proposing. A wife. He needed a wife. You don't seem like the marrying type, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Jinho's expression didn't change. I'm not. But the Park family controls significant portions of Seoul's commercial real estate through their banking connections. They also owe my organization 4 billion won in unpaid debts from failed construction projects they conveniently forgot to disclose during their bankruptcy restructuring 3 years ago. He slid a folder across the table. Maria opened it to find photographs, financial statements, legal documents, all meticulously organized. Her ex-husband's signature appeared on dozens of pages, right next to his mother's. Business legitimacy, Jinho continued, requires certain optics. A wife provides stability in negotiations. It signals permanence. The kind of permanence that makes investors nervous when they're considering whether to support the Park family's upcoming hotel development bid. You want to destroy them? It wasn't a question. I want what I'm owed. Destroying them is simply the most efficient path to collection. He leaned back, studying her like she was a balance sheet he was learning to read. You need a visa. You need protection from deportation. You need resources to rebuild your life. I'm offering all three. Maria felt something ignite in her chest. The same rage that had sustained her through every humiliating doctor's visit, every pitying glance from Jinhee's friends. Every night she'd cried herself to sleep, wondering what was wrong with her body. What else? She asked. A penthouse in Gangnam, full access to my legal team for your visa processing, a monthly allowance that exceeds what most Seoul executives earn annually, and when this is finished, a divorce settlement generous enough to start over anywhere you choose. And what do you get besides legitimacy? Jinho's smile was cold, calculated. The ultimate scandal. Lee Jinhee's defective American wife, the woman his family discarded like garbage, now married to the man they fear most. Every business dinner, every charity gala, every society function where the Park family tries to restore their reputation, you'll be there, reminding them, haunting them. He stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. They stole 4 billion won from my organization and thought their social status would protect them. They threw you away and thought you'd disappear quietly. We both have scores to settle, Maria. The only question is whether you have the stomach for it. Maria looked at the folder, at the evidence of her ex-husband's lies, at the financial schemes his family had built, while she'd been struggling to afford her flight home. She thought about Jinhee's mother calling her defective, about the lawyer who'd smirked when serving her divorce papers. She looked up at Jinho, her decision already made. When do we start? Maria's fingers trembled slightly as she dialed the number she'd sworn never to call again. 3 rings, then his voice, that same condescending tone that had crushed her spirit for 5 years. Maria? What do you want? She smiled at her reflection in the floor-length mirror of her penthouse suite. The woman staring back looked nothing like the broken girl who'd signed divorce papers 6 months ago. I'm calling to let you know I'm getting married tomorrow. The silence on the other end was delicious. You're what? To who? His voice cracked on the last word, and Maria closed her eyes, savoring every syllable of his confusion. Someone who actually values what I bring to the table. Goodbye. She ended the call before he could respond, tossing the phone onto the bed where her simple cream dress hung waiting. No elaborate gown this time. No 300-person guest list or 7-tier cake. Just a signature on a contract that would change everything. The civil ceremony took 11 minutes. The government office smelled like floor polish and old paper. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead as a bored clerk recited words Maria barely heard. She focused instead on Jinho's profile. Sharp jawline, cold eyes that had destroyed empires before breakfast. The man beside her wasn't promising forever. He was offering something far more valuable. Power. "The rings," the clerk prompted. Jinho reached into his jacket pocket and produced a velvet box. When he opened it, Maria's breath caught despite herself. The diamond was obscene. At least 10 carats, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the ugly overhead light and transformed it into something extraordinary. He slid it onto her finger without ceremony, his touch clinical and brief. "Mrs. Park," he said quietly. Not a term of endearment, a statement of fact. She signed her name in the registry book, her last signature as Maria Chen. When she looked up, Jinho was already heading toward the exit, their marriage certificate tucked under his arm like a business contract. Which, she supposed, was exactly what it was. The chauffeur held the car door open, and Maria slid into the leather seat beside her new husband. Seoul's skyline stretched before them through tinted windows, a city she would now navigate as the wife of its most dangerous man. "The announcement goes out tonight," Jinho said, scrolling through his phone. "My PR team will handle the press. You'll need to be ready for cameras tomorrow." "I'm ready now." He glanced at her, something almost like approval flickering across his features. "Good. Because everyone who dismissed you is about to learn what a mistake that was." Maria twisted the massive ring on her finger, watching light fracture through the diamond. From disappointment to weapon. From invisible to untouchable. Mrs. Park. Strategic asset. Seoul's newest power player. Let them all watch. The first thing Maria did was throw away every single piece of clothing that reminded her of who she'd been forced to become. The shapeless dresses, the dowdy cardigans, the sensible flats that had kept her invisible and insignificant in Jonathan's world. Gone. She stood in the boutique on Rodeo Drive, watching the sales associate's eyes widen as she handed over Jinho's black card without hesitation. The woman had looked at her differently when she first walked in, another nobody trying to window shop among the elite. But money spoke louder than assumptions, and Maria had decided she was done apologizing for taking up space. "I'll take all 3, she said, gesturing to the silk dresses draped across the counter. Each one cost more than she used to make in a month as Jonathan's wife. The irony wasn't lost on her. The transformation happened in stages. First came the wardrobe, sharp lines, bold colors, fabrics that whispered wealth against her skin. Then the salon, where she sat for 6 hours while they stripped away the mousy brown Jonathan had always preferred and restored the rich chocolate of her natural hair, highlights that caught the light, a cut that framed her face instead of hiding it. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her in the mirror. At night, alone in Jinho's penthouse guest suite, she studied everything she could find about the fashion industry. Trade publications, competitor analysis, market trends. She memorized the names of every major player, every rising brand, every potential weakness in Jonathan's carefully constructed empire. Knowledge was power, and she intended to wield it like a weapon. Jinho maintained his distance, just as they'd agreed. Professional, cordial. She'd catch glimpses of him leaving for work in the mornings, perfectly tailored suits, and that cool, calculating expression he wore like armor. Sometimes their eyes would meet across the expanse of marble and glass, and something would flicker in his gaze, approval, maybe, or recognition of the warrior she was becoming. But he never said anything, never pushed. The arrangement was clean, transactional, and that suited Maria perfectly. She didn't need comfort or validation. She needed ammunition. By the end of the second week, the meek, apologetic woman who had begged her husband for scraps of affection no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, sharper. Someone who had learned that the world didn't reward weakness, only the willingness to fight for what you deserved. Maria studied her reflection one final time before heading to her appointment with the divorce attorney Jinho had recommended. Designer dress, perfect hair, confidence that radiated from every carefully composed inch of her. Jonathan had wanted to erase her, to make her small and forgettable, so he could parade his mistress without consequence. He was about to learn just how catastrophically he'd underestimated the woman he'd betrayed. The crystal chandeliers of the Grand Hyatt Seoul cast diamonds of light across Maria's crimson silk gown as she descended from Jinho's Rolls-Royce. The dress, a masterpiece worth more than her ex-husband's annual salary, clung to her curves like liquid fire, the thigh-high slit revealing legs that had once scrubbed his family's floors. Her hair cascaded in glossy waves over bare shoulders, and around her neck sat a ruby necklace that could fund a small hospital. She was no longer the maid. She was vengeance wrapped in Valentino. Jinho's hand found the small of her back, possessive and proud. When she glanced up at him, she caught something in his eyes she'd never seen before. A flicker of genuine awe that made her pulse quicken. "Ready to make them choke on their champagne?" he murmured against her ear. The ballroom fell silent as they entered. Conversations died mid-sentence. Champagne flutes paused halfway to painted lips. Maria felt every gaze like a physical touch, but she kept her chin high, her smile serene. This was her moment, and she would savor every second. She spotted them immediately, her ex-husband Minho standing beside his mother, that vicious woman who had treated Maria like dirt beneath her $1,000 shoes. Next to them, clinging to Minho's arm, was his new girlfriend, perfectly Korean, perfectly pedigreed, perfectly boring in her safe ivory gown. The girl her former mother-in-law had deemed suitable. Mrs. Park's face went white as fresh snow. Her hand clutched her pearl necklace as if it might anchor her to reality. Minho's expression was even better. His jaw had literally dropped, eyes bulging as they traced every magnificent inch of Maria's transformation. Jinho led her directly to them, his smirk sharp enough to cut glass. "Mrs. Park, how delightful to see you again." His tone dripped with poisoned honey. "You remember Maria, don't you? My girlfriend." The word girlfriend landed like a grenade. That's impossible," Mrs. Park sputtered, her composed facade cracking. "She's a what?" Maria's voice rang clear and cold across the suddenly silent circle. "A maid? Yes, I was. I cleaned your toilets, scrubbed your floors, cooked your meals while you treated me like I was invisible, less than human." She turned to Minho, whose face had gone from shock to something that looked dangerously like longing. "I loved you, gave you everything. But I wasn't Korean enough, wasn't cultured enough, wasn't worthy of the Park family name." She stepped closer, her smile devastating. "Funny how things change. Now I'm with a man who sees my worth. A man whose family name makes yours look like a footnote. A man who treats me like the queen you never believed I could be." Minho's new girlfriend looked like she wanted to disappear into the marble floor. Mrs. Park's face had turned an alarming shade of purple. But Maria wasn't finished. "Enjoy your suitable match, Minho. I hope she's everything you deserve." The gala's noise faded to a distant hum as Jinho led Maria through a concealed door onto a private balcony. Seoul sprawled beneath them, a constellation of lights that made the city look deceptively soft, almost forgiving. Maria leaned against the railing, champagne untouched in her hand. "Thank you for tonight. For making them see me as more than—" "Don't!" Jinho's voice cut through the cool air. He stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him despite the night chill. "You were never less than anything." She turned to face him, searching his expression in the amber glow of the city below. "You really believe that?" "I've watched you rebuild yourself piece by piece," he said quietly. "That takes more strength than they'll ever possess." Maria's breath caught. They'd practiced this dance for weeks, the careful touches, the staged intimacy, the performance of devotion. But standing here, away from the cameras and the crowds, something felt different, dangerous. "This revenge," she whispered. "Does it actually fix anything? Or does it just make you colder?" The word landed like confession. Jinho's jaw tightened. "It makes you colder, harder, until you forget what warmth felt like." "Then why help me?" He reached up, fingers ghosting along her cheekbone with a tenderness that made her heart stutter. "Because maybe helping you find your way back might heal something broken in me, too." The admission hung between them, heavy with implications neither had planned for. Maria's carefully constructed walls trembled. This wasn't part of the arrangement. This wasn't strategic. "Jinho," he kissed her before she could finish, and it wasn't the practiced gesture they'd perfected for audiences. This was raw, desperate, real. His hand cupped the back of her neck, drawing her closer as if afraid she might disappear. Maria kissed him back with equal hunger, her fingers tangling in his hair. Weeks of careful distance shattered in an instant. The champagne glass slipped from her hand, forgotten, as she pressed against him with a need that terrified her. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jinho rested his forehead against hers. "We should go." "The gala? I don't care about the gala." His voice was rough, edged with barely controlled desire. "I care about getting you somewhere private before I forget we're supposed to be playing a role." Maria's pulse thundered in her ears. "And if I don't want you to remember?" His eyes darkened. Without another word, he laced his fingers through hers and led her back inside, bypassing the glittering ballroom entirely. They moved through marble corridors and private elevators, the journey to his penthouse passing in a blur of heated glances and barely restrained touches. The moment the penthouse door closed behind them, their carefully maintained pretense dissolved completely. This wasn't business. This wasn't strategy. This was two people who'd found something real in the middle of their calculated performance, something neither had expected and both desperately needed. The morning after the gala, Maria's face was everywhere. Photos of her standing beside Jinho, draped in emerald silk and diamonds, splashed across every tabloid and gossip site in the city. The headlines were vicious. Gold-digging maid snares billionaire. Criminal past exposed. Jinho's shameful secret. From prison cell to Park penthouse. The Park family had unleashed their full arsenal, painting her as a scheming opportunist who'd manipulated her way into Jinho's world. Maria sat frozen in Jinho's study, her phone vibrating endlessly with unknown numbers. Her mother called in tears. Former co-workers sent cruel messages. The internet had already convicted her, dissecting every detail of her past, twisting her imprisonment into proof of moral bankruptcy. She felt the old shame crawling back, threatening to swallow her whole. Jinho found her there, pale and trembling. He knelt beside her chair, taking her cold hands in his. "Look at me," he said quietly. When she finally met his eyes, she saw something that terrified her more than the headlines. Absolute, unshakable fury. Not at her. For her. "This ends now." He made one phone call, then another, then a dozen more. Maria watched as he transformed into something she'd never witnessed before. Not the controlled businessman, not the wounded son, but a force of nature bent on total destruction. His legal team assembled within the hour. Private investigators delivered files thick with evidence. Journalists he'd cultivated for years suddenly had explosive stories land in their laps. The retaliation was surgical and devastating. By noon, news broke of the Park family's embezzlement scheme. 15 years of siphoning company funds into offshore accounts. By evening, tax fraud documents flooded the financial news cycle, detailing millions in unpaid obligations. Overnight, photographs emerged of the Park patriarch's mistresses, his gambling debts to underground casinos, his son's cocaine habits, and bribes to city officials. The empire didn't just crack. It shattered. Stock prices plummeted. Board members fled. Criminal investigations launched. The family that had destroyed Maria's life with false accusations now scrambled desperately as their own corruption spilled into public view, undeniable and complete. Maria watched it unfold with strange detachment. She'd wanted them to pay, yes, but this wholesale annihilation felt different than she'd imagined. "You didn't have to go this far," she whispered one night as news anchors discussed the Park family's impending indictments. Jinho pulled her close, his voice steady and certain. "Yes, I did. They tried to destroy you. Again." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to see the truth in his eyes. "I would burn the entire city down before I let anyone hurt you. Not anymore. Never again." She realized then what they'd actually built together. Not just revenge, not even justice, really. Something more permanent. A fortress where the girl who'd once scrubbed floors alone could finally stand untouchable, protected by someone who'd chosen her worth over his family's reputation. The victory tasted bittersweet, but undeniably real. Maria stared at the test results trembling in her hands, the clinical black text blurring through her tears. 3 weeks since the war had ended. 3 weeks since Richard's empire had crumbled and he'd slithered away into obscurity. And now this. Pregnant. The word felt impossible. Foreign. After years of her ex-husband's vicious taunts, barren, broken, useless, she'd believed the lie had calcified into truth. She'd stopped imagining children, stopped letting herself want what she thought her body would never give. Her phone buzzed. Richard's name flashed across the screen, and her stomach turned. She deleted the message without reading it. Whatever pathetic apology or manipulation he was attempting now meant nothing. He was a ghost from a life she'd buried. But Jinho, God, Jinho, how could she tell him? They'd never discussed children. They'd barely caught their breath from surviving. What if he saw this as a complication? A burden he'd never asked for? The apartment door opened, and she quickly wiped her eyes. "Maria?" Jinho's voice carried that familiar warmth that still made her chest ache. His footsteps approached the bedroom. "You okay?" She couldn't speak, just held out the paper with a shaking hand. He took it, his eyes scanning the results. The silence stretched eternal, every second confirming her worst fears. Then he looked up, and his expression stopped her heart. "Maria," his voice cracked. He pulled her into his arms so fiercely she gasped. "Your body knew." "Knew what?" she whispered against his chest. "That it was safe now. Loved. Home." He cupped her face, his dark eyes bright with emotion she'd never seen before. "You were surviving for so long. Your body wouldn't let this happen until it knew, really knew, that you were protected. That we were ready. But we never talked about, I want this." The words came swift and absolute. "I want you. I want our child. I want every single day of this messy, beautiful life we're building." He pressed his forehead to hers. "You're not broken, Maria. You were never broken. You were just waiting for the right time, the right person." The tears came then, unstoppable. Years of shame and self-doubt cracking open to let something fragile and precious bloom underneath him. Her phone buzzed again. Richard, still trying to claw his way back into her consciousness. Without looking, Maria powered it off completely. "He doesn't exist anymore," she said quietly. Jinho's arms tightened around her. "No, he doesn't." Outside, the city hummed with ordinary life, people rushing to work, traffic honking, the world spinning forward. Inside this small apartment, Maria felt the future shift and reshape itself into something she'd stopped believing possible. A family. A real one. Built not on control or cruelty, but on the kind of love that had fought through hell to survive. And won. The contractions started at dawn, pulling Maria from sleep with a force that made her gasp. Jinho was awake instantly, his hand finding hers in the darkness, his calm voice cutting through her panic. "I'm here. I've got you." 12 hours later, their daughter entered the world with a cry that shattered every wall Jinho hadn't known he still had standing. He held her for the first time with hands that had signed billion-dollar deals without trembling, and now shook like leaves in a storm. "Sophia," Maria whispered, her voice hoarse but certain. "Her name is Sophia." Jinho looked up, tears streaming down his face without shame. "It's perfect." The penthouse transformed. Late nights became feeding schedules and lullabies hummed off-key. Jinho, who'd once barked orders at executives without breaking stride, now paced the nursery at 3 a.m, swaying gently with Sophia against his chest, whispering to her in Korean about the stars beyond the window and the mother who'd changed everything. Maria watched from the doorway one night, unseen. Jinho didn't know she was there as he gazed down at their sleeping daughter, his voice soft with wonder. "Your mother is the strongest woman alive," he said quietly. "She saved me from becoming a monster. She saw something in me I'd buried so deep I thought it was dead." He pressed a kiss to Sophia's forehead. "Never forget that strength doesn't roar. Sometimes it just keeps showing up, one honest word at a time." Maria turned away, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears falling silent and warm. 5 years passed like water through fingers. Precious, impossible to hold, gone before they were ready. Sophia grew wild and bright, splitting her time between English and Korean, between her mother's steady wisdom and her father's fierce protection. She had Maria's eyes and Jinho's stubborn jaw, and she ruled their world completely. One evening, with Sophia finally asleep after an epic bedtime negotiation, Maria and Jinho stood on their penthouse balcony. Seoul glittered beneath them, a city they'd conquered together in ways neither had imagined that first night in his office. "You know what's funny?" Maria said, leaning against the railing. "I lied to get through your door. Jinho wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. I know. I've always known. And you hired me anyway. Because the lie brought me to something true. He turned her to face him, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that still made her breath catch. You were never broken, Maria. You were just waiting to be planted in soil that could actually nurture you. She smiled, reaching up to cover his hands with hers. We built this kingdom together. On our own terms, he agreed. Below them, Seoul pulsed with light and life. Above them, stars witnessed what poverty and power had failed to destroy. Two people who'd gambled everything on honesty, and won. If this story touched your heart, please like and subscribe for more. See you in the next video.